Good evening. Well, it might be morning for you when you watch this. Um, Once again, this is Alex Mirkovic. Our first day is over, and I had a look at your IDs. They look really good. Wrote a couple of comments there, and anyways, so far so good. We survived the first day. Some of you guys have taken already the quiz, and the results look good, and they will be even better. And the first one is the most difficult. Then you get used to the way of thinking, and then and experience. You can't beat the experience, as they say. So things are looking good. Our first day is over, and it's time for us to start second day, new chapter. That is, we have two chapters. Chapter 16, Capital and Labor, and Chapter 17, the West. A beautiful picture of... anyways, here I'm looking at the textbook. So the more important of these chapters is the one, Chapter 16, Capital and Labor. And it's about industrialization. So in the same way that the previous chapter, I told you always think about the main theme of the chapter. And previous chapter, chapter 15, was reconstruction. So, how to bring the country together after a civil war that took a lot of people, a lot of casualties, hundreds and thousands of casualties, dead and wounded. So, anyways, now we're talking about industrialization. And this is a little bit of a difficult concept to understand, although we kind of instinctively understand it because I think we still live in industrial society. And basically, throughout history, you have two kinds of society. You have an agrarian society and an industrial society. And the basic difference is how do you find your food, your nutrition. In an industrial society, you go to work, you earn money, and then you take that money, go to, I don't know, Super Fresh, City Grocer here in Elizabeth or other places, Wegman, wherever you go, and then you buy food, right? So we don't grow it. Unless, you want to show off that you're, a farmer who likes to grow tomatoes in the backyard. But that's, just for other purposes. It's not for survival. So agrarian society, actually society of farmers, where people grow their own food and they consume it. That's one way of living. And the other way of living is an industrial society. So obviously industrial society is much more complicated than the agrarian society. And in many ways, Civil War was about this choice. The North was industrialized, or it was industrializing in the 1860s. It started actually, industrialization is as old as the United States. So there were already before the Civil War, there were two visions for the country. And usually those are called the Jeffersonian vision and the Hamiltonian vision after Alexander Hamilton, the guy who they made a musical about recently. Anyways, but Jefferson was a farmer from Virginia, and Hamilton was a banker and lawyer from New York. So that's something really important to remember about American history. You have these two visions. One is Jeffersonian vision, is the vision of independent farmers. So Jefferson wanted Americans to be independent farmers, self-sufficient. You grow your own food, you have your own cattle, you kill the cow and you eat the beef. That was the Jeffersonian vision. Hamiltonian vision is the vision of manufacturing and industry and trade, and associated things like banking, finance, and things of that sort. So that starts from the very beginning of the foundation of the Republic. In the South was an agrarian society, which specialized. It was very not any kind of agrarian society, but specialized in cash crops, tobacco, and cotton. and they made a lot of money. And actually, it seemed for the first decades of the American Republic, it seems that that's a more profitable way of doing things. In the beginning of the Republic, South was wealthier, and you see that by who was elected president in before the Civil War. Southerners, because they were wealthier. It was a more successful enterprise, even though it was based on slavery, but they made profit. But this starts to change during the Civil War, and then during the Civil War it became obvious that industrial North has some things that agricultural South did not have. And therefore you have these two visions of, this thing that we were talking about in the previous chapter about slave labor and free labor, and the vision in the North about free labor. And anyways, in comparison to slavery, right, free labor looks good. Now, this chapter is now about industrial North. And industrialization of America was done in the North. And very soon after the Civil War, you start having issues. Things happen. And our book, our textbook actually kind of emphasizes those problems quite a lot. Labor strikes, rise of inequality, and so on and so forth. Socialist, politics of gold. So these are all economic issues that pop up with the growth of industrial society. One of the greatest problems in an industrial society is that this free labor is not as free as it is often presented to be. In other words, when they present it to you, oh, well, you can apply, you can find a job whenever you want to. You can quit your job whenever you want to. If you don't like it, you move to another one. If you're paid little, you move to another. Well, anybody who's been on the job market knows that things are not as simple as they put it in the brochure. There's always a small print. Very often, you can't quit your job because you can't find another one. Very often, you have to put up with unseemly things and strange things at work because you cannot quit your job, because if you quit, you won't pay the bills, so on and so forth. So these issues develop in industrial society, and consequently labor movement develops with the demands of safety in the workplace, and the competing sides. The business owners want you to work more for less money, and you as a worker, you want to work less for more money. That's just the natural thing that happens in an industrial society. So this chapter is about these issues, labor conflicts, strikes, various organizations among the workers, and so on and so forth. It's also one of the things that is kind of missing in this chapter is that nobody forced people to go into manufacturing centers of the North, great industrial cities, New York, Boston, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago. Those all became gradually, Pittsburgh, oh my God, the city of steel, right? This city of steel. So people went there because it was a better choice than staying in a farm in somewhere in rural Arkansas or rural Tennessee and places, or even out there in the West where you can be a cowboy and chase the bisons, whatever people in the West were doing. So these were the options there, and so industrialization of America, on the one hand, brought about great prosperity, beginning from the Civil War all the way to well, it was around World War One that United States become the greatest industrial power in the world. This process of industrialization wasn't just something that was happening only in United States. It was happening. Actually, it originated in Great Britain, but it was happening in France, it was happening in Holland, it was happening in Spain, it was happening in Germany, it was happening in Russia. But the winner was the United States. In other words, by the time of when we get to World War One, and that's the end of our first week, the first half of semester, United States are going to be the greatest manufacturing and industrial power in the world. And usually, this was measured in the amount of steel produced, and nobody could match United States in terms of the amount of steel that is produced. And American steel actually has, it's a northern thing. It's a thing of the Great Lakes because the iron mines are up there in Minnesota. And you take iron through the Great Lakes, bring them down to the cities like Chicago and Cleveland and Pittsburgh, and where there is coal, and then the iron is melted and gradually turned into steel. And with steel, it's the basic material that you can build things. So you can build locomotives, you can build tractors, you can build various machines, agricultural machines, plows, later on cars, buses, tanks. Anyways, that's how the North won the Civil War, because it had more steel, it could produce more rifles, it can produce more ammunition, and so on and so forth. So that's the manufacturing power of the North. And industrial society is not society of equals, as we all know. They are Bill Gates and Elon Musk's and was the Bezos guy, right? Who are enormously wealthy, kind of numbers that when you see the wealth of these people, so you can't really imagine that sort of a number. And there are people who are on food stamps and on Medicaid and things of that sort. So one of the biggest problems of industrial society was inequality. This program of industrialization was done by the Republican Party. As I mentioned before, the Democratic Party through the 19th century was a peasant party, agrarian farmers party of farmers. And so, by and large, it opposed industrialization. And there's other issues kind of related to this. For example, the issue of this gold standard that pops up a lot in this chapter. What was that about? Well, it's about money. Traditionally, it was thought that paper is paper, right? It's a piece of paper, and I write on a piece of paper $1 and say, okay, this is $1, and it says, no, this is you writing $1 on it. So that's how people treated paper money. Now, paper money existed during the Civil War, and because of the emergency. But in general, people wanted to be able to say, okay, this is a piece of paper that you gave me and it says $100 on it. I want to be able to go to the bank and get gold for it, something that is, that has real worth. And so that's what is called the gold standard. It's that you can actually, take a piece of paper and say, okay, I want $500 worth of gold, and the bank says, no problem, there you go. Here is your, gold. Well, so the issue here with the gold standard, and then there is also a silver standard, is basically about how much money you can print. And you can print only as much money as you have gold in the bank. Or it gets more complicated than that, right? Usually it's taken that, you have to have 1/10 of the amount that you can print. Because not everybody is going to go to the bank in the same day. That's called, if that happens, that's called the run on the banks. So, the banks have to have a limited amount of gold, for the daily transactions. People come in and say, okay, I want the gold, and so on and so forth. So these are the issues that are popping up in industrial society that are kind of complicated economic issues. And so that's what I wanted to explain to you guys tonight about it. So basically, people who wanted gold standard wanted less money in circulation. When you have less of something, even in this case money, it becomes more valuable. So to put it simply, the rich people wanted less money in circulation, and the poor people wanted more money in circulation. Because if there is more money in circulated, what's the proverb that they say? What is the word they say in the Bible? Even the dogs eat the crumbs from that fall from the master's table. So in other words, if there is a lot of money in circulation, there is a little bit for the poor also. So that's the idea. And so these are the couple of economic issues that I wanted to clarify for you guys before you start working on chapter. What is the chapter? Chapter is 16, right? 16. Capital and Labor. And we have a couple of interesting people. John Pierpont Morgan. J.P. Morgan, the founder of what used to be called Chase Manhattan Bank. It's now Chase Bank. You have other people here. His friend Jay Gould and Black Friday of 1869. I'm sorry. That's So you'll see. You'll have a look what that is all about. So what else we have here in terms of IDs? Let me see, where did they put them? Oh, here they are. Okay, here they are. No, I couldn't find them. Oh, okay, here they are. Okay, we have Cyrus McCormick, a great industrialist of Chicago. McCormick spices are still around. If you go to the supermarket, you'll find them. That's the same guy, and he invented a lot of agricultural machines and produced them using iron, right? And sold them to the Midwestern farmers. Now, one of the big symbols of industrialization in the 19th century were railroads. And I'll use these railroads to kind of make a transition into the West, into the next chapter. Because, well, the growth of America was from the East into the West. From the East Coast, from the cities of colonial cities of the East Coast, Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Charleston. Those were the Baltimore, those were the 4 or 5 greater cities on the East Coast, and then move inland. These connections inland were followed by the railroads. So, for example, the railroad from New York to Chicago goes through Buffalo. And this is so because it's much easier to go through the Hudson River Valley from New York here to go up north into the Hudson River, and then around Albany you turn left into the Mohawk River, follow that valley, and it's always easier to travel through the valleys than up and down the Appalachian Mountains. And then you see that when if you take I-80 towards Chicago, towards west, it kind of goes up and down. Whereas going to Buffalo, you follow the river, and it's much easier to build there. So, for example, the train, Amtrak that goes from from Chicago to New York and from New York to Chicago passes through Buffalo, Cleveland, and that way Chicago. I say this because this is the route by which the West was settled. And first you have, that's why I gave you Cyrus McCormick, because he represents this success of Chicago as the heart of America, heart of the American Midwest, right? And it's Chicago is so important because it's an exchange point between the farmers in the West and in the South and the industrial North. That's where, and this sort of issue is repeated again and again in the chapter. You have cattle farmers, cowboys in Texas. They take care of the cattle. They put the cattle on the train. The train takes them from, I don't know, Dallas, Texas, right? That's Fort Worth, Texas. That's a cowboy city. Put it on the train takes the cattle to Chicago, and then right by the train station in the South Chicago, you used to have enormous slaughterhouses where the cattle was killed and turned into steaks and other things, oxtails and things of that sort, sorted, sold out, and sent back to the East Coast and to the great cities of Midwest, to people who were industrial workers. So this also applies to the West. In other words, Americans moved west in search of land. For the most part, they had a different vision of what should be done with the land from the Native Americans who were living in those areas. And there was a conflict. There are all kinds of conflict in the West, but the main ones between the farmers and the pastoralists, the cowboys, right? The people who take care of the cattle. Why? Because farmers want to grow something and harvest and sell it, like wheat, barley, corn, I don't know, potatoes, tomatoes, you name it. And that's what the farmers wanted. And the cattle people, the cowboys, they want something different. They want meadows and grass so that cows can grow and the cows can graze and move around and eat and grow, get big. So there are conflicting interests, but their interests are sort of united against the Native Americans, who in many cases were hunters and gatherers. And hunters and gatherers go around and hunt and gather, right? Natural products, and that's a very different lifestyle. It's a different vision of the world. Farmer, whenever he goes, he wants to know where is the edge of my property. This is as far as I can go and plow. If I go across, that's somebody else's field, and I don't want to plow somebody else's field. So the boundaries of property are important. Whereas, if you're talking about hunters and gatherers like Native Americans, that's not important. You go around and hunt an animal as when you can catch it. If it crosses some sort of a boundary, who cares, right? So anyways, there was a conflict there that developed in several nasty episodes. And that's why you have the sitting bull here. And finally, the most difficult of these ideas is this Frederick Jackson Turner. And that's it's an interesting concept for you to understand, to grasp in history. Frederick Jackson Turner was a historian, and he sort of summarized, he put in words things that um, a lot of people were kind of expressing in a less clear way. And what is this thesis about? It's about American individualism, and this was especially present in the movies. For example, these images are no longer popular, but a cowboy, Marlboro cowboy, people used to smoke. No longer it's happening, but 20 years ago, a lot of people used to smoke. And anyways, there's this image of a Marlboro man, a cowboy who is on a horse, and he rides through through the prairies of the West, and the mountains are in the background, and he rides with the sunset, and he's a rugged individualist. And so that was basically Frederick Jackson Turner's thesis, that America's character was a character of an American cowboy, that who is always pushing the boundaries, going further into the Native American territory, getting rid of those Indians, taking away their land, can-do attitude, with a good sense of justice, fiercely independent, and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very glorified image of America that he presented, and it's a very flattering image of America that he presented. So a lot of people liked it. A lot of people didn't like it. They're myth busters among historians. That's sort of our hobby also. And they point out that actually these cowboys were not as independent as they seemed, as it looks on paper. They were actually just cogs in the industrial machine. So if you look at I don't know, Joe Smith, imaginary cowboy somewhere in Fort Worth, Dallas, Texas, he works for somebody who actually works for somebody who sends cattle back into Chicago. In Chicago, there is a meat packing industry, and that meat packing industry is owned by somebody, and that's actually the capitalist, the boss for whom this cowboy somewhere down in Fort Worth, Texas, is working. So he's not as independent, he's not as rugged as it seems on the first glance. So those are the people that you have. Daniel De Leon is one example of an American socialist. And socialism is a movement that originates with the French and American Revolution. We like to pretend that it's not an American movement. It's something that's kind of very foreign to American mentality, but that couldn't be further from the truth. And so you have one example of American homegrown socialist in the 19th century. The most successful slogan of all the labor movements in the 19th century was the 8-hour day. And it was achieved gradually with a lot of problems, with a lot of strikes, with a lot of conflicts. A lot of these strikes in America were violent, and there was violence on both sides. There were violence on the people on the side of factory owners, who would hire thugs basically to beat up workers and drive them into submission. And there was violence on the side of workers. There was you'll remember this. This is a theme that's going to be popping up again and again. Usually those people are called anarchists, and anarchists were a very, very special kind of socialists and labor activists who believed in terror. In other words, commit an act of terror to indicate and to point to everybody injustices in the society, and then when people see that, they will rise up. That never happened, but that was a very, very popular ideology in the 1880s and 1890s and in the early 1900s. And there were a lot of these people, and eventually some of them will, assassinate American presidents and so on and so forth. So all these are coming attractions. So, but these are the ideas that I have for you guys. Think about industrialization as the main theme, main topic of this chapter. And when you write those ideas, try to connect everything you see there with industrialization. Let me just go over the quiz. You have the issue of gold standard, things of that sort, labor union, various labor organizations, May 1st, blah, blah, blah. A little bit about railroads, populism, William Jennings Bryan, and there was a famous speech that he gave about Jesus being crucified on the cross of gold, in which he criticized this gold standard. In other words, the limited supply of money and keeping the value of money very, very high. Another thing that the Republicans favored in this time period was also high tariffs. And it was very different from the Democrats, who were opposed to tariffs, and there are actually good reasons in both cases. Republican Party was the party of industrial workers and industrial owners in the North. And they didn't want German and British and French and Canadian goods to come into our country and kill these industries. So that's still an issue, right? We're still debating, whether or not there should there be tariffs on Chinese goods. And we sort of lost this primacy of manufacturing, that most of manufacturing just moved into China. But that's coming up in later chapters. So anyways, Republican Party was in favor of high tariffs in order to protect US manufacturing. Democratic Party was party of farmers, and farmers needed machines and other necessities of daily living, and they wanted those things to be cheap. And the way you make them cheaper is you import them. In other words, this happened recently in our history, when American cars were very expensive, and the President Reagan actually was allowed the import of Japanese cars into our country, and and then the price of cars came down. Now, anyways, so these were the issues, political issues related to the industrialization, the main topic of our chapter. And right, that's about it. So I think that covers it. Turner thesis, right, that covers it. So that's all what I have for you tonight. And good luck tomorrow. New quiz is open, new IDs are open. And right, the best of luck to you. Day 2. All right. See you then soon at 12 o'clock noon meeting that we have. All right. Bye.